Hello, this is Alex Waiver from ONG Tax and Accounting Services. So in this video, we're going to talk about Notice 2022-36, where the IRS provides penalty waiver for Form 1040 Series, 1120 Series, and certain information returns. It also includes Form 1040 for personal returns. So we're going to dive deep into it and see what this notice talks about and who qualifies for such waiver or relief. Now, to start off and diving deep into this topic, let me just throw a word of caution out there that this video is for educational purposes only. It is not meant to be a legal or tax advice. And if at any point in time you need a legal or tax advice, always consult with a competent tax attorney, a CPA, or an enrolled agent who is going to be able to figure some of these issues out. This notice encourages taxpayers to file their 2019 and 2020 return on or before September 30, 2022. What the notice also does is, if you have filed a late 2019 and 2020 income tax return, if you've already filed it, the penalty relief is going to be automatic and there's no need to call. This notice also provides a great opportunity for individuals and businesses to catch up on their back taxes and save on the failure to file penalties. You don't want to be charged the failure to file penalty when this great opportunity has opened up. Now, to the extent that the penalty was previously assessed and already paid, the taxpayer will receive a credit or a refund. Now, the IRS is estimating that about 1.2 billion in penalties will be refunded to about 1.6 million taxpayers. So this is really huge. So what it essentially saying is that if you have already filed your return and where the return was late and you were assessed a penalty and you paid for it, the IRS is going to reverse that penalty, and that's going to result in a refund or credit. Cases where you've already filed and you've been assessed a penalty, but you haven't paid, and the IRS continue to send you tax notices that you have to pay. Now, because of this relief, you don't have to pay it. The IRS is automatically going to waive those penalties as long as it qualifies for this waiver for 2019 and 2020. Now, I did talk about the major highlights, but let's go ahead and repeat them all over again. Now, this notice encourages you to file your 2019 and 2020 late personal or business returns on or before September 30, 2022 to qualify for the relief. When you do this, as long as you qualify, you only pay the taxes and the interest that is owed and other penalties like the failure to pay and failure to deposit and all of the other penalties. But then for failure to file penalties and any interest that is due on those failure to file penalties will be waived or abated. Now, the abatement also applies to 2019 and 2020 information returns that were filed before August 1, 2020 or August 1, 2021. So what this essentially means that if you file certain information returns, right? So for example, if you filed a 2019 information return on or before August 1, 2020, the penalty for failure to file will be waived. If you also filed a 2020 information return, as long as the 2020 information return was filed on or before August 1, 2021, those penalties for failure to file will also be waived. Now, what information return is the IRS referring to here? So those will usually be the 1099s and the W-2s and the 1095s, all those information return that we use to prepare our personal and business tax returns. That's basically what the IRS is referring to over here. Let's look at who qualifies for this waiver or relief. If you have already filed your tax return, the penalty relief is automatic. If you're eligible, you do not need to apply for anything or call the IRS. The IRS is going to abate it or waive the penalty. If the penalty has already been assessed, the penalties will be abated. Also, if you've already paid a penalty, the taxpayer will receive a credit or a refund. And the IRS is estimating that any refund that's due to go out should be done by the end of September 2022. Now, for taxpayers that are yet to file their returns, this is the time to file because you would only qualify for this relief as long as the return is filed on or before September 30, 2022. Let's look at the type of tax returns that will generally qualify under this waiver or relief. Now, the relief applies to the failure to file penalty. It's very important that we stress on it that this notice, even though it's very broad and captures a whole bunch of tax returns, what it seems to do, or what it's definitely doing, is to provide waiver for failure to file penalty. That is the only penalty that it's applicable here. So the failure to file penalty is typically assessed at a rate of 5% per month or up to 25% of the unpaid tax. So usually a failure to file penalty only comes in when you file your tax return and you owe taxes on it. If you owe taxes, you're going to be hit with a failure to file penalty. If you do not owe taxes, then there's no failure to file penalty. If you do a refund, there's no penalty. So that's what it is. Now, this relief applies to the following 1040 series as is showing on your screen. So it applies to all of this 1040 series. So you can pause the video and review all the forms that is captured here. Now, the form also applies to failure to file penalty. It provides a failure to file penalty relief for 1041 series. So on your screen, you will see all the 1041 series that the IRS captured in the notice. So you have 1041, 1041N, and 1041 KFT, which I have the images also here. The failure to file penalty also applies to 1120 series. So these are all the 1120 series we have. There's a whole bunch of them that this notice captures. On the image on your screen, you would also see pictures or images of all the various 1120s that this waiver seems to capture. So they're all on your screen and you can take some time, pause it and review it, and then you move on. The waiver or the notice or the relief also covers certain returns like the Form 1066 for real estate mortgage investment conduit. It also captures 990PF for exempt entities for private foundations. There's also the 990T, which is the business income tax return for nonprofit. So it captures these returns as well. One of the most important forms that cannot be left out in this waiver or relief are those penalties, those international cross-border forms that attract huge sums of penalties. So for example, you have the Form 5471, which attracts $10,000 per form. You have the 5472, which also attracts $25,000 penalty per form. And you also have this 3520 and 3520A. Usually 3520 is used to report certain distributions and funding of trust and all of that. And then also the 3 funding of a foreign trust, or when you receive certain foreign gift and bequest or inheritance. It's usually reported on 3520. So what 3520 captures is very broad, and you should read the instructions to figure out who files these forms. The same thing applies to 3520A, which is also related to annual information of foreign trust with a U.S. owner. So the IRS says that for Form 5471 and 5472, it applies when a penalty is systematically assessed when you attach these forms to a late filed 1120 or Form 1065. So as long as you file this 1120 and 1065 late and attach these forms to it from 5471 and 5472, the penalty will be abated as long as it's for tax years 2019 and 2020. Now, it also includes the penalties that is assessed by the campus assessment program with respect to Form 3520 and then Form 3520A, as I've explained earlier. Let's also address the penalties for failure to file or the failure to show certain required information on this flow-through entities, which is the 1065 and 1120S. So the penalty also captures this. Now, for these two forms, 1065 and 1120S, there's a failure to file penalty for these forms themselves. And then also there's a failure to file certain informations like the K1, or when you basically did not file the tax returns correctly, you get a penalty. Now, but it's actually capturing the failure to file the forms itself And then also the failure to show a required information. Usually when you file a 1065 or 1120S and it's late and you did not provide a K1 forms, the IRS may slap you with a penalty. And so those penalties are also waived under this Notice 2022-36. Now, last but not the least, let's take a look at the failure to file penalty for certain information returns. Now, this information returns is different from the international information returns that I just talked about. These are information returns or forms that we use it to report our income on our tax return, and also businesses uses it. So the following lists are not all inclusive, but these are the type of information returns that the failure to file penalty seems to capture when they talk about information returns. And it's not all inclusive. For example, I do not see W2 and the 1096 and the 1042 forms here, but they are all included. So you need to review the Notice 2022-36 to get a proper view of all the forms that are captured in the notice. So for these forms, the IRS is saying that for 2019 information returns, you're not going to get a failure to file penalty as long as these information returns are filed on or before August 1, 2020. And then also when you take the 2020 or the 2020 information return, the IRS says that you're not going to get a failure to file penalty as long as this information return were filed on or before August 1, 2021. Here is it. I have it on the screen. It gives you when you have to file these forms to qualify for the waiver. And for 2019 information return, as long as it is filed on or before August 1, 2020, you're good. For 2020 information return, as long as it was filed on or before August 1, 2021, you're good and you qualify for the relief. Now, with any laws or most laws or any rules or regulation, there's an exception. The relief here is very broad, but the IRS also deserves the right to carve out an exception such that the relief is not going to be available in some of these situations, such as 1, where a fraudulent return was filed. The second one is where the penalties are part of an accepted offer in compromise or a closing agreement. So let's say you filed your 2019 and 2020 returns late, you got slapped with a penalty, and then you entered into an offer in compromise or a closing agreement, and then you basically settled all the debt. Those penalties that were assessed is not going to be refunded to you. They do not qualify under this waiver. It's the same thing with the final one where the penalties were finally determined by a court. So if you were assessed the penalty and you ended up litigating it in court, and where the court finally determined that you still have to pay the penalty and that's it, it's final, then those penalties that the court has finally determined is not going to be part of the waiver. So you're still going to pay it as long as it's been determined by a court. Now, the notice in general provides a great relief for a bunch of taxpayers, but there are certain issues that the notice did not address, and we're going to talk about it. Now, it is important to know that the relief only applies to failure to file penalties. It does not apply to other penalties such as failure to pay, penalty for underpayment of estimated tax, accuracy-related penalties, failure to deposit, etc. It is also not clear if this was intentionally omitted, but the notice did not address cases where forms 5471, 8858, 8865 are attached to 1040s and 1041s and 1120s. The IRS in its notice talks about where these forms, where the 5471 and 5472 are attached to 1120 and 1065, but it did not address these scenarios where you have 5471, 8858, 8865 attached to 1040, 1041s, and 1120s. So you would find on the notice section 3A 1 through 4 of the notice, and it will show you all the listed tax returns and information returns, which I shared earlier on. But the notice did not list late filing penalties for Form 990, 990 Easy, 926, 8865, 8858, 8938, So that is something that also needs to be considered. Now, this is my thinking. To the extent that these forms were not explicitly captured in the notice, affected taxpayers would have to rely on the reasonable cause for abatement. Or if any of these penalties qualify for first-time abatement, you probably should be using it. If not, you should be using the reasonable cause abatement. I mean, unless the IRS issues as a correction to this notice. And finally, the notice did not explicitly address situations where this information returns were not included on a timely filed return. So let's say you filed your tax return, your 2019 and your 2020 return early, right? You filed it on time, but then you forgot to include this information returns such as the 5471s and the 5472s and the 8858 and all of that I have mentioned earlier. The question is whether you can amend those originally filed returns to include the omitted information return. That was also not answered in the notice, so we will see in the coming days. Now, other than the exceptions and the other stuff that I talked about that was not addressed in the notice, this notice generally is a good deal, right? It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that taxpayers need to take advantage of. And so I would advise that you act now. If you haven't filed yet, I would encourage you to file your late 2019 and 2020 returns on or before September 30, 2022. I am aware that this is a very short time notice to assemble your tax information and have them prepared, and then also go to the extent of qualifying for the relief. It is still advisable for you to begin that process now. So if you need some assistance from a professional CPA, just feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to help. We can strike a deal and go through all your accounting information and then gather all the documents we need to be able to file these returns for you on time. So I hope this video helps you out, and if it does, please click like, share, subscribe, and we'll talk on some other video. Bye for now.